And now we're back. I'll stop sharing my screen. And Per, you should actually be able to, what's it called, to take over the presentation. I can see you have done that, so that's perfect. One last thing I need to do is to switch to English-speaking word for the typing. That's there we are for the transcription. It is so. So, Per. Well, a big welcome to you. Thank you for participating today. It's a blast having you here. I have been looking so much forward to learn some more about the Sophos MDR service and also what Sophos is looking into in order to cybersecurity. You know, as you and I have been talking about a lot, we have a lot of issues at the moment, and they are only growing. So it's a fluffy future we're looking into, but you know, I know that you guys have some solutions to cover some of that up. So take it away. And if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll write them in Danish if you want to. I'll translate them to Per in the end of the presentation. So take it away, Per.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Martin, and thanks, ZISPA, for arranging this. I'm also really excited. It's a really nice topic. And something that we're seeing a bigger and bigger kind of interest in lately. So just to start off by introducing myself, my name is Per Söderqvist. I'm the kind of technical lead for the Nordic and Baltic region here at Sophos. I've been with Sophos for coming up to 10 years now, and at least from my perspective, cybersecurity has changed a lot since, especially around 2020. So we're seeing a bigger interest coming from kind of higher up in the organization, where the kind of board members want to get a better understanding of what companies are doing in order to protect. And we're also seeing a huge shift in kind of the threat landscape. And I'll talk a little bit about that during my presentation as well. I always like to have a little bit of a theme for my presentation. So I decided to go with this particular theme for this presentation. So excuse my pronunciation, but Sun Tzu was a Chinese military general. I think it was approximately 500 years before or BCE. And he also published The Art of War. But one of the key aspects of that book is really, in order to be able to defeat your enemy or defend against your enemy, there are two very important components. First of all, you have to know yourself, and also you have to know your enemy. And if both of those are in place, you need not to fear the results of 100 battles. And this is actually very relevant when we're talking about IT security as well. It's very important to know your own organization and also understand kind of what the different criminal gangs are doing out there. So that's one of the things that I'll cover during this session, and I'll also spend some time talking a little bit about kind of the concept of MDR, or managed detection and response, and kind of what that actually is, because I know, especially working with IT security, we tend to use a lot of acronyms like MDR, TTP, IOC, etc., and this means something for us, but I also know that for a lot of customers and a lot of people out there, this is just gibberish. So I'll at least try to be as clear as possible during my presentation. And like Martin also mentioned, if anyone has any questions, just write them in the chat. So I'll start off with kind of explaining one of the very important backbones of the Sophos organization, which we call the XOps team. Again, another acronym, but this actually consists of several different teams. It consists of more than 500 people. But what we're doing with our XOps teams is doing a lot of research, understanding kind of where the threat landscape is going, in which direction, finding out new ways that new groups are attacking organizations. We're also trying to create as much automation as possible when defending against these threats, as well as providing kind of human-led threat intelligence in the form of helping to protect our customers 24/7, finding signals that could potentially mean that an organization could be under attack. We also have something called early warning system, where we're continuously monitoring both the kind of dark web as well as our customer base to see if any organization could potentially be at risk at this point in time. And we also have a team called Rapid Response. Rapid Response is an incident response that anyone can call upon. So you don't have to be a Sophos customer, but if you are currently experiencing an attack, you can call us. We can help out and start to do some investigation on what's actually happening. We also have a lot of tools that we can use, but one thing that is of course extremely important in these scenarios is also the documentation part. So finding out, kind of going back, seeing what was the root cause of this attack and so on. And one of the things that we tend to look at are different attack types. So there are several different attack scenarios out there, but two of the most kind of, the most damaging ones at this point in time is the state-sponsored cyber attacks and the commercial cyber attacks. So the state-sponsored, these are a little bit different. So the state-sponsored cyber attacks are, the objective of this attack is really to get access into an organization, try to make as little noise as possible so that they can hide within that network and continuously over time collect as much valuable information as possible. And these are quite tricky to detect for kind of if you're just relying on a traditional approach of security solution. The commercial cyber attack is a little bit different. So they tend to, first of all, of course, again, penetrate an organization. They'll take their time, they'll find valuable information, but usually one of the final steps of these attacks is that they'll deploy ransomware. So this is usually when a customer starts to notice, or an organization starts to notice, that they're currently under attack. And this is also when we're seeing that they tended to call into our rapid response team and say that, okay, we need some assistance in order to kind of clear this up. And when it comes to our rapid response, one thing that I do want to mention, so we've looked at some data from last year and started to see, okay, all of the attacks that occurred, how many of them actually had some early warning signs associated with them? Meaning that there were some sensors, there were some alarms being triggered before the actual ransomware was deployed in the organization. And we're seeing that most of these attacks, so 83% of the attacks, had some early warning signs. They had some alarms that had gone off beforehand, but basically no one actually looked at them. There are, of course, also scenarios where different hacking groups just come in and without any further ado, they just deploy the ransomware as quickly as possible. And we noticed this in 17% of the cases that we were involved in during last year. Now, some of the warning signs could be like, for example, someone is trying to do credential dumping. They're trying to steal passwords off computers. They're trying to evade defenses. They're doing privilege escalation. They're using lateral movement in order to kind of take as big as control as possible over the organization. so these are some of the things that you kind of need to have a look at, and also one thing that we're seeing is you always need to kind of rank them in different orders in order to prioritize. Okay, is this something that is severe? Is this something that we really need to investigate? Another trend that we're also seeing is that a lot of these attacks, they start during the late evening, during the night. So they want to have as much freedom as possible. A lot of the ransomware are being deployed on Monday night or Tuesday morning. And the part of the exfiltration, this is when the criminal gang will also steal some data, usually takes place 2 days prior to the actual ransomware deployment. And another trend that we're seeing is that they'll take their time. So once they've managed to breach an organization, on average, they'll spend 11 days trying to take as much control, steal as much valuable data as possible, and then also so that when they deploy the ransomware, they can do that on as many computers as possible at the same time, creating as much damage as possible. Now, every now and then, we also come across some more interesting scenarios when we're getting called upon by different organizations. So there was actually one case last year in May 2022, where an automotive supplier got hit with 3 separate ransomware attacks. And what the criminals did, they basically abused an RDP, so remote desktop protocol, in order to gain access into this organization. So it was a fairly small organization, 25 users and 2 servers. And the 3 groups that were involved in this particular attack were called Lockbit, Hive, and Black Cat. So Lockbit is one of those commonly known hacking groups. They've been around since September 2019. They're what's called a ransomware as a service type of organization. And they're also known for this double extortion method, meaning that they'll kind of steal valuable information and also plant the ransomware. So they're using both techniques, and this is just so that they can ensure that the organization that gets hit will actually pay up. Hive is another example. They actually, a couple of weeks ago, Europol managed to take them down. We're seeing this continuously, but they tend to pop up a little bit later on with a new name, with some key figures still associated with this group. But they've been known especially to target healthcare, retail, energy sectors, also utilizing this double extortion method. Now, the third group, Black Cat, has made a lot of noise lately. And they have links to DarkSide. So DarkSide was one of the groups that was behind the Colonial Pipeline attack, as well as the Dark Matter group. And they use a kind of a triple extortion method. So first of all, they use ransomware commonly during their attacks. They'll again steal valuable information, but they also sometimes use a DDoS attack in combination, again, to create as much damage as possible. But when we started to do the investigation for this particular automotive company, we started to do some findings. So what we tend to do is we do research, we try to understand how did they manage to get in, what actually happened, what steps did they take. So what we found was that the initial access via this misconfigured RDP was already found back on the 2nd of December in 2021. And Lockbit then started to utilize that one on the 20th of April in 2022. So again, they managed to get access. They started to do exfiltration, so steal valuable information. They used Mimikatz in order to steal passwords and move across the network and then on the 1st of May, they planted the ransomware. On the same day, we also started seeing activity from the other group, Hive, that also then, they kind of went straight for the kill. So they didn't bother with doing the exfiltration piece. They just went straight for the ransomware deployment. And then on the 15th of May, Black Cat also utilized the same way in the published RDP, and also went straight for the kill, just planted the ransomware, but they also did some clear up on event logs in order to kind of cover their traces. But this made some very interesting findings. So when we started to look through their file system, we could see that, first of all, this is the original file, utilpack.pbl. Then we can see Lockbit came in, encrypted this file. Then Hive came in, put another layer of encryption on top of this encrypted file. Then Lockbit has this automation where it's continuously scanning to see if the files are encrypted. And since it had changed, it thought that it's no longer encrypted, so it put another layer of encryption on top of it. And Hive has the same technique. So again, it put another layer of encryption on the same file. And then finally, Black Cat group came also in on the same and encrypted the file as well. So we can say that this file was encrypted several times before the customer decided that, you know, we need some help here. We need some professional assistance. And safe to say that the files that got encrypted, the customer or the organization basically said that, you know, we have to take our losses in this particular case. So I wanted to show you a quick video on this scenario. So we actually did a test to kind of see for ourselves how does these attacks actually occur. So what we did was we created a server on AWS, and we opened up the remote desktop protocol towards the internet. Which is, of course, not the best practices. But we're seeing this time and time again, and the criminal gangs are utilizing a lot of automation in order to actually find published RDP servers that they can target. Now, if you're using Sophos, of course, we would flag this immediately. So one of the key aspects of, for example, an MDR service is for us to work proactively and find weaknesses that could potentially mean that criminals can target that in order to gain access into an organization. But what we did for this test, we disregarded this critical alert where you can see that we've flagged that there is an RDP open towards the towards internet, and then we left it open for 10 days and just wanted to see a little bit on how many automated target attacks were performed against this server. So one way to find out is to use our live discovery. So with live discovery within Sophos Central, you can do what's called data lake queries. So here you can start to ask different types of questions. Could be anything. Maybe you want to see, does everyone have BitLocker enabled? Does anyone have any particular applications installed? But in this particular scenario, we wanted to create a question where we're basically asking how many failed login attempts have we seen during the last 240 hours, the last 10 days. So I just put in failed authentication attempts in my query, and then I run it, and within a couple of seconds, I get an answer back saying, okay, this is what we've seen. We've seen in one scenario from one remote IP, or close to 5,000 attempts to try to authenticate against this RDP server. So you can also see that they're using a lot of usernames in order to kind of try to get into the system. And you can see in some cases it has the incorrect user, in some cases it has the incorrect password. But there are a lot of attempts being made completely automatically in order to kind of find or brute force their way in. Now, one other interesting thing here would also be to run this query, but finding out if anyone has actually done any successful login attempts. So we'll change the query to saying, okay, let's not look at failed login attempts. Instead, let's look at successful login attempts. So meaning, has anyone actually managed to breach this RDP server? And what we can see is that there have been a couple of successful login attempts, but so far it's just coming from within the internal network, meaning that the criminals have not yet managed to actually breach this server. But giving it enough time, eventually someone will manage to actually breach that. Now, in some cases, we get a lot of interesting information on how these criminal gangs are operating. And one of the best scenarios where we actually got some really valuable information was with a group that called themselves the Conti Ransomware Group. So Conti Ransomware Group was basically had parts of their organization based in Russia and parts of the organization based in Ukraine. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainian side of the Conti Ransomware Group basically went out and said, well, F the Russian government, glory to Ukraine, and you can download all the information on how we've been operating, how we've been performing attacks. And this gave us a very unique insight into how these different groups are actually structured. Coming back to that original kind of know thy enemy, understand how they're actually operating. And what we found with this leaks was, first of all, that they had a huge revenue stream coming in. So in 2021, they basically made 180 million US dollars. So it's a very lucrative business. We also saw that they had more than 100 employees. They had their kind of headquarters in St. Petersburg, but also they had, very much like any other company, a structure where they had management, programmers, testers, hackers. They had support departments. They even had their own kind of sales department, where we could read some of their internal email communication where different salespeople are writing to each other. Some really interesting messages being sent back and forth. But how the Conti Ransomware Group usually performs their attacks. So breaking down the kind of attack in different stages, what we could see is when they're doing the reconnaissance, basically this group, they targeted big companies, anyone that had more than $100 million in revenue. They had done a lot of automation, so they also used this ransomware as a service. They had tools that they could automate an attack. And when it comes to delivery, kind of this is when they want to get into a network, they used social engineering. And I heard Martin talked about this as well. So we're still seeing social engineering as one of the biggest parts of different attacks. And then they do exploitation, they use installation. So they use tools like Cobalt Strike, Armitage in order to actually spread across the network. And they also use a lot of kind of legitimate tools in order to avoid detection as much as possible. And then the actions that they perform was, again, steal valuable data, intellectual property. They also try to compromise backups, and then as a final step, they'll deploy the ransomware. And an organization that gets hit by the Conti ransomware strain, they usually see this note popping up on the computers that have been encrypted. And they also do this where you can send 2 files and just kind of free of charge, goodwill from their side, just proving that they're able to actually decrypt the files that have gotten encrypted. And they also have a final notice here. You should be aware, just in case, if you try to ignore us, we've downloaded a pack of your internal data and are ready to publish it out on our news website if you do not respond. So organizations that decide not to pay basically end up on this Conti News website. So this is a website that they used to host, and any organization that decided not to pay would end up here. And anyone can actually access this website. You can see that there are some different companies, and you can also go in and you can see how much have been published. So in some cases, it's only 30%, like in this particular scenario, and you can see the data that's available to download directly from with this website. And they also have this chat function. So if you have any questions, you can always also talk to them. But there are, of course, a lot of these different scenarios and a lot of these different groups, but the principle is usually the same. They'll tend to use what's called live off the land techniques, try to not use kind of malware, instead try to use built-in tools to avoid detection. They'll take their time. So like I mentioned before, on average, they'll take like 11 days in order to gain as much foothold as possible within the organization. And they'll also then steal data. Sometimes they use a combination of DDoS attacks and ransomware. So they've become really good at this game. And we are doing researches so continuously as well. So this is one example, the state of ransomware, where we asked 5,600 companies across 31 countries, have you been hit by ransomware during last year? And the global average is that about 66% have been hit by ransomware during last year. And this is a number that we continuously see increasing. I also find it quite interesting to look a little bit more into the different sectors. So we can see that, like, for example, financial services are the ones that are least hit, whereas retail, media, and so on are more frequently hit. But we can also quite easily correlate this with how much they're spending on IT security. And finally, what I also find interesting is kind of what are companies doing that get hit by ransomware. So most companies today are relying on backups in order to gain or get their data back. Some still decide to pay, which is of course kind of fueling this industry, and nothing that we support in any way. And some are also using other means, or some are just disregarding this information. But whereas the kind of double extortion method becomes more relevant, just relying on backups is something that the criminals are seeing, okay, we need to find other ways, and that's why we're seeing that that's a huge increase on that end. And also, one trend that we are seeing is that smaller and smaller companies are continuously being hit by these automated attacks. Like the automotive supplier, for example, was a very small company. But it's something that usually these types of attacks were mainly being targeted towards the really big companies, but they probably want to expand their customer base, and that's why we're also seeing that they're starting to target smaller and smaller companies as well. So with that, a little bit of kind of understanding on the enemy side. What we're seeing is that there's lately been a huge increase in interest in different services or kind of managed IT security. So just to kind of explain a little bit what we're doing with MDR. So first of all, it's a fully managed 24/7 service delivered by experts. So they have the human knowledge, the understanding of how different cyber attacks are evolving and changing, and new vulnerabilities that are being used to target companies. and help them to provide a layer of protection. Now, according to Gartner, they're seeing a huge increase in the interest in this type of service, and by 2025 they're predicting that 50% of companies, organizations will use an MDR service. And the reasoning behind this is that it's simply becoming too complex. It's hard to find that expertise. It's hard to build kind of the threat intelligence yourself. So our goal is really to focus on this and create this kind of cybersecurity as a service where we're combining the services, the technology, and everything in one solution, so that customers don't have to go out and add and pick in different types of solution, but basically combining everything into one single solution. So we have a long history. We've been working with IT security for more than 30 years, and we have a big portfolio of different security solutions, so stretching from endpoint security to network security, cloud, email. We have the management portal called Sophos Central, where customers or partners have the ability to manage all of our different solutions. But one thing that we've seen is that, of course, in a perfect world, everyone would just use Sophos technology, but that's not really how the reality of the world looks like. You're most likely using something on your network side, you're using something else as your endpoint security, a third option on your cloud security, and so on. And one of the key aspects that we've been focusing on is also providing capabilities to help to protect a company that have different technical solutions already in place. So that's one of the key aspects of our MDR service. And this differs a little bit. So when you look at kind of the MDR market, or managed detection and response market, we're seeing that there are two different types of MDR vendors out there. There's the one that are only focusing on kind of bring your own technology MDR, ingesting data from, could be anything, Windows Defender to Palo Alto firewalls, from your email security solution, etc., and correlating all that information. You also have the single vendor MDR that are only focusing on their own technology. And this is where we also used to work previously, but since then we kind of shifted into falling in between, where you can both bring your own technology as well as having the Sophos technology. So really providing that flexibility. Now, what does an MDR service actually do? So in our case, first of all, we are doing what's called threat hunting. So we're seeing different attack patterns. We're continuously looking if any of the organizations that we're protecting are potentially vulnerable against new types of attacks, if they're using tools that are vulnerable, if there have been any suspicious events occurring. So all of that we'll do on a continuous basis. We're also including threat detection. So more of a kind of, if something, or more of a reactive type of approach. So if something gets executed, we'll of course take action and neutralize that particular threat. We also include incident response, and so if something happens, again, we will mobilize, we'll take action, we'll find out, we'll do a root cause analysis, finding out how did they manage to get in. Was it through a phishing email, or was it through a vulnerability? And again, comes back to this proactive approach. We want to make sure that customers are not vulnerable against attacks. So finding ways or working proactively in order to defend against new types of attacks. And Today we have more than 15,000 customers using our MDR service worldwide. And one thing that we are really proud of is also our response time. So how long does it take for us to detect a new threat? How long does it take for us to start the investigation? And also how long does it take for us to actually respond? And this will change. In some cases, it might be longer if it's a more complex attack. In some cases, it might be shorter. So, but at least we are very open and publishing these figures continuously. So what I like to do is kind of break down the MDR service, because there are a lot of different offerings out there, and they can differ between different vendors. So the first one, I've divided this into 5 pillars of what we are including in our MDR service. So I've covered a lot of this, but first of all, you have the 24/7 SOC with included incident response. So, and this also covers all of the Sophos solutions, as well as you actually get the toolkit yourself so that you can go in and get a better understanding of what's happening. We also include all third-party security solutions. So if you're not using Sophos, maybe you're using, let's say, Windows Defender, for example, that's also included in the service, as well as all the Microsoft tools are also included in the service. The other pillar of the MDR service is the third-party integration. So what we can do here is we can take telemetry or take data from other vendors. So I mentioned endpoint. We have support for Microsoft, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Trend Micro, Symantec, Trellix, Malwarebytes, and BlackBerry. So as well as on the firewall side, cloud, email, identity, and network, meaning that we can then take all that information in as well. And how we're doing this is we're utilizing our data lake within Sophos Central. So taking all this telemetry, applying threat intelligence. Of course, one thing that we are very focused on is we don't want to do the same thing over and over. So we want to automate as much as possible, also when it comes to incident response, and then correlate all that and contextualize that. So I actually wanted to show you a quick demo of what it actually looks like in the Sophos Central dashboard, just so you can get an idea of how we are actually working with cases. So I'm currently logged in to Sophos Central. You can see here that we have the Threat Analysis Center, and you have different sections here. So you can use live discovery, where we can, for example, do different queries. We can ask different questions against our endpoints or firewalls or cloud environments, etc. But what we're doing with MDR when it comes to detections is picking up on all signals on what we're finding. So a signal can come in from our endpoint protection, it can come in from Fortinet firewall, it can come in from Windows Defender, and then we can also start to see, okay, what telemetry, what have we actually observed with this signal? Like it's stated here as well, if you're an MDR customer, you don't really have to be in here. You don't have to have a look at this, because we'll do all this work for you. But one thing that I often hear from customers and partners is that it's really valuable that you get this insight into what's actually happening. And you can use this tool as well as kind of if you want to do a little bit of threat hunting yourself. So with all these signals, but the next step that we will do is start to kind of correlate all this information into investigations. So if I have, let's say I can take the this particular incident, we can start to see, actually, let me go back and take another one. Let's take this one. So what this means is that we'll start to take different detections that we've seen and group them together. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you are currently under attack. It just means that we have started to observe something and we want to do further investigation and keep an eye on this and understand better on what's actually happening. And it could be a bunch of different investigations that we're running at the same time. But you can also start to see that in some cases, we've started to take a lot of different events and group them all together, different signals coming in from different places that could potentially mean that, okay, we need to do a little bit further investigation in order to find out what's actually going on. If it happens to be an actual attack, what we'll then do is we'll go in and create a case. So if there's been any cases generated, we'll communicate clearly what's been observed, what have we actually found. And also another aspect of this is that depending on how you've configured this, you can have it in either authorized mode, which means that we'll take kind of full responsibility, we'll take all the actions needed. In some cases, customers have it in more of a cooperation mode. So it's, again, depending on how you configure the service. And also there's no changes in, or no difference in kind of the licensing. But you can also find out more on what have been found, what are the operators working on, and also have the ability to add your own messages to this case if needed. And at any time, of course, you can also send an email or just call in directly into the SOC if needed. So that's kind of just giving you a little bit better understanding, but there are basically three different stages then. So first of all, we have the detections where we're taking all the signals in. Then we're creating investigations where we're starting to really dig deeper and understanding what's actually happening. And if we're seeing that this is a security incident, this is a breach, for example, we'll then move over and create a case. And this is again where, depending on how you've configured it, the service, if you want us to take full responsibility, we'll do that, we'll respond to it. Or if we want us to cooperate, we'll do that. Another thing that I also talked a little bit about was the kind of integration piece earlier, where you can just set up the different integrations. Just wanted to quickly show this as well so that you can get a better understanding of all the different integrations that you can connect. The more sensors we have, the better visibility we have, and the quicker we are also able to actually react if something is happening. So with that, I'll just move on. And the kind of third pillar of our MDR offering is also a tool that we call Factory. So Factory is a way for us to be able to automate an incident response. So it's, of course, if everything is Sophos solutions, it's easy for us to respond. We can, for example, our endpoint protection can tell the Sophos firewall that, you know, this computer is currently compromised and we don't want this computer to be able to communicate to the internet any longer. So then we have that ability with our synchronized security in order to actually share information in real time between our endpoint protection, our email protection, our cloud protection, as well as our firewall. So all of those can coexist. Now, it's a little bit harder if you're having another vendor's firewall, for example, and you have another vendor's endpoint protection. So Factory is all about kind of providing that level of security, even though you're using third-party security solutions. So providing capabilities so that if it's Microsoft Defender seeing something, we also want to create an automated workflow that we want the Fortinet or Palo Alto firewall to respond to. And Factory allows us to create these different workflows and do what's called automated incident responses. Like I said before as well, we don't want to do the same thing over and over again. If there's a way for us to create a workflow in order to neutralize a particular threat, that's something that we would, of course, encourage. And the fourth pillar is defined as NDR, network detection and response. So there will always be a scenario where you have devices that are connected to your network where you aren't able to put an agent on the device itself. It could be an IoT device or an OT device, or an outdated, not supported Windows, or different types of scenarios, basically, of devices that you still want to create a layer of protection over. So NDR is an appliance. It's not a physical appliance, it's a virtual appliance that you install in your network on a span port on your switch. And what we can do then is we can start to monitor all the internal traffic within that organization. So we can apply several different layers of protection. So one thing that we're, for example, doing is creating a baseline, like understanding better on what does a normal communication pattern look like for this particular organization. Now, if we start to see anything deviate from that, let's say your CCTV camera all of a sudden starts to communicate to China or Russia, well, that would be something that is potentially very suspicious, and probably something that we need to do a little bit further investigation on why that is. But we can also do one of the cooler features within this is called encrypted payload analytics. So what we're doing is we're using a patented way to look at the tunnel itself in order to determine what type of traffic is actually passing through this encrypted traffic. So there are a lot of different tools, like I mentioned before, commonly being used by hackers like Cobalt Strike or Crackbot and so on. And we have a way to actually kind of create an image of what this type of communication looks like, and then provide that insight as well for all the internal traffic. So if we were to see any encrypted traffic within the network that could potentially be of a malicious nature, we would detect that with the NDR appliance. And then kind of the fifth and final pillar of the NDR offering, of the MDR offering, is the sensor mode. So like I said before, we understand that some customers are using another endpoint security solution. So what we want to do is also then provide the capabilities to run alongside that. So what the sensor will allow us to do is respond to a particular threat, even though you're running Windows Defender or Trend Micro or something else. We can also use the sensor in order to ask follow-up questions. Maybe we want to understand better, especially if we're doing an incident response. We want to get the full picture of what actually occurred. How did they manage to get in? So this would allow us to do that with the sensor mode. But one of the key aspects of our MDR offering is all about flexibility. So when it comes to people, some companies, they have the expertise in-house, so they just want us to work alongside of their security team. Some companies don't have any expertise whatsoever, so they basically want us to take full responsibility. And our MDR service is able to adhere to all of these different scenarios. Same goes with processes. So if we detect something, how do you want us to resolve this issue? Do you want us just to communicate, provide kind of a guided response? Or should we work together on eliminating this particular threat? Or should we, Sophos, take full responsibility and do full-scale incident response? And exactly the same thing goes when we're talking about the technology piece. Some companies are only using Sophos solutions. Some companies are using a combination or no Sophos technology whatsoever. So providing that capability in order to fit in all of these different scenarios. And when we are communicating as well, depending on how you set it up. So, and one thing I want to mention here as well is that you can at any time change between these different modes. So if it's more of a guided response, we'll provide information about what we've observed, our recommendations on steps to take. If it's in collaborate mode, we'll basically provide, again, information on what we have observed, but also the things that we recommend you to do, as well as, let's say, we'll do A, B, and C, and you do X, Y, and Z. And in authorized mode, it's more like, this is what we've observed, and these are the actions that we've taken in order to neutralize this particular threat. Another huge value of this, of course, is also that we'll provide you with detailed reports summarizing all the things that we've observed on a weekly basis, as well as on a monthly basis. And we can also, if we look at kind of what we are including in the MDR service, so of course all the Sophos solutions, you get 90 days of data retention included. You also get the Microsoft connectors, both to the graph security as well as the Office 365 and third-party endpoint protection. And you have the ability to add on integrations. So like the NDR, the network detection response, where we're creating that baseline of the network traffic and providing a layer of protection of all the devices that are connected to the network, but that we can't put an agent on, as well as different packs. So it could be a firewall integration pack. And one thing I want to mention here is that it doesn't matter on how many firewalls you have. It could even be that you have different brands of firewalls. You still just need to buy one firewall integration pack. And one other component that's often being combined is the 1-year data retention. And I'm seeing that this is also a lot to do with kind of more from a compliance perspective. So that's very kind of high level, at least how I would like to break down the MDR service. But some key takeaways from this service is really that you have a team of experts that have the threat intelligence, understanding on how different attacks are continuously evolving and how they are being performed against companies. And the kind of human-led aspect of your IT security, where someone is actually looking at all of these different signals that are coming in, and not just looking at them from a static point of view, but instead contextualizing all the information, seeing that, okay, something occurred on this server, and 2 days before that, something else happened on this endpoint over here, and start to correlate all that information and understanding, okay, there's definitely something suspicious happening. Having that human eye looking on it is extremely powerful. So that's kind of the basics and the takeaways from the MDR service. So yeah, with that, I'd just like to open up for questions if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Thank you so much, Per. I'll just jump in and I'll stop the recording now, and then we'll jump into questions. So just give me a quick one.